Welcome to the podcast of the Urban Christian Institute. I am your host, M.J. Jackson, and we're about to get into it again today. I'd like to put the finishing touches on this long-winded, prolonged Worldview series that I've been doing, but I think I can squeeze maybe after this episode one more episode out of it, because I want to explore the worldview of myth. But before I can actually do that, I told you guys that I wanted to come back and really explore the importance of logic or right reasoning. I want to do that. Now, the last time when we talked regarding worldviews, I pointed out that this would be a highlight because whenever we engage in worldview evaluation, we have to employ these tools in order to be effective. So let's take a look. Now, the logic of truth begins with the law or principle of non-contradiction. This law pretty much states that nothing can both be and not be at the same time in the same respect. Nothing can possess incompatible properties. That is, nothing can be what it is not. For example, Jesus cannot both be sinless and sinful. Jesus cannot claim to be the son of the one and true living God and be a New Age or Hinduistic avatar. If there exactly is one God, there cannot be many gods. The logical principle is not unique to possession of Christianity. It is truth of all creation. God ordained us pretty much to think in this way because the world operates this way. Okay, so this is not only a law of logic, but it's a principle of being. Okay. Despite what some, theologians have claimed, the Christian faith does not require that we somehow transcend this law or any law of logic. God is consistent and cannot lie. Okay? Let me repeat. God is consistent and cannot lie. There are no two different logics or anything like that. So that's just malarkey. Furthermore, God cannot deny himself or assert what is false, nor can he make both something true and false in the same way at the same time. Now we know that there is no limit on God. It is a virtue. Those who claim that this basic principle of thought is false must assert this principle in order to deny it. Okay. In so doing, when people who try to ignore this fundamental law of logic, they make a mockery out of all thought, in language, communication, and the very notion of truth. So they engage into a morass or a big old ditch of meaninglessness. Okay, check this out. Some people may try to ignore this fundamental law, and they might say, consider the statement this: the law of non-contradiction is just not true. It's false. For this statement meant itself that they're making that the law of non-contradiction is false. They want you to take that this statement is true. Okay? For this statement itself to be true, it must contradict this opposite. Okay? You see that? That is, the law of non-contradiction is true, but in so doing, it must affirm the duality of truth and falsity, which is the very thing that the law of non-contradiction itself affirms. So to say that the law of non-contradiction is not true, you're actually using the law or principle of non-contradiction itself. Okay. Second thing, the law of non-contradiction combined with the specificity of the Christian faith, truth claims about the high stakes involved in choosing whether to believe in Christ means that truth for the Christian is confrontational. Okay, I've been getting in a lot of confrontations over the last few days. I probably do have to spend a little bit more time in prayer, spending so much time in the house. Maybe need to go outside and walk a little bit. But the truth claims of Christianity are confrontational. That don't always mean that we need to be confrontational, but the confrontation will come, so to speak. And yes, I've been engaging in a little bit of that. But while the postmodern world beholds the great welter of lifestyle trends and facades, and can only utter whatever with a smirk and a slouch and a yawn, the followers of the way, that's us, we cannot be so nonchalant and easily pacified. Okay. But what about the next law of logic? So we have the law of non-contradiction. Okay, so just talked about that. The next law that comes up is the law of excluded middle, and it trades on the same essential insight as the previous law I just mentioned, non-contradiction, by stating that any factual statement and its denial cannot both be true. Either Jehovah is Lord or he is not. And for Jehovah to be Lord, we know what that means. I mean, master, ruler, Lord. Okay, these are very personal terms. These are very these are specific terms. Or he is not Lord. Either Buddha was right or he was not. Either Buddha was enlightened or he was not. There is no middle option. Jesus assumed this principle when he warns that no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Some may protest that not everything, is black or white. Some things are gray. So the principle does not hold universally. It is true that everything is not black or white, but the law of excluded middle does not reduce everything to binary relationships. Rather, it affirms that no statement and its denial can both be true. A statement cannot be both gray or vague and not gray or vague. See how that works? All right. What about the law or principle of bivalence, which states that any ambiguous declarative statement is either true or false? Not neither true nor false. It's either true or false. Okay? And not both true and false. So check this out. Statements with an intended double meanings and meaninglessness or ambiguous statements do not fall under this principle because they fail to assert one thing. Okay? The statement like this, that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, is either true or false. The statement that Jesus was God in the flesh is either true or false. Moreover, both these statements cannot be true, okay, because of the law of principle of non-contradiction. Muhammad cannot be the last and greatest of the prophets if he was fundamentally mistaken about Jesus' identity. Hello. However, both of these statements could be false if there is no God. Since there would be no God-inspired prophets and no divine incarnation, some have disputed the law. Pretty much some have went on to dispute the law of bivalence by claiming that sentences may have many meanings depending upon the interpretation. Okay? Thus, a sentence cannot be either true or false if it has many meanings, each of which has its own true value. But check this out. That's all that postmodern new age garbage right there. But this is how you deal with that. Okay? This objection misses the point since the law does not address questions of interpretation, which is hermeneutics. Okay, the law is not addressing questions of interpretation, which is hermeneutics, but the truth value of a statement once its meaning is determined. So, when the meaning is fixed, the truth value is strictly binary, true or false. Okay? Check this out. Lastly, the principle or law of identity simply states that something is what it is. A equals A. A thing itself and nothing other than itself. A thing is itself is and nothing other than itself. If we say that you are not yourself today, we don't violate the principle of identity. We mean rather you're acting kind of strange. Okay? This strange person is still identical to himself, even if she are acting weird. Okay? Like some of us who are dealing with cabin fever. Okay? Nor does this law deny the fact that things change over time. What it denies is that something cannot be what it is at any given time. I cannot be 51 years old and 52 years old at the same time. Okay? But, some people have claimed that basic logical principles are Western or male, and thus not universally valid. Okay? To assert their universality is to engage in the kind of intellectual imperialism or cognitive colonialism. Whether one uses logical principles is a matter of convention or even taste, they say. And furthermore, to insist on their universality is wrong and narrow-minded. Well, check this out. The last statement, in order to be meaningful, that I just made at all, in order for it to be meaningful at all, must assume the principle of non-contradiction as necessarily true. So logic is rearing its head even when people from other regions of the world even try to communicate or dispute something. Okay? Furthermore, the foundational principles of logic are not the property of any one ethnic or religious group. Paul Griffiths, a noted scholar of Buddhism as well as a Christian philosopher, puts the lie to the idea that there is a special Buddhist logic distinct from Western logic. Okay, so he puts the lie to the idea that there is a special type of logic. Reflecting on his experience in reading the first millennium Indian Buddhist writers, he says, I immediately felt a great sense of familiarity, of recognition. Here was a philosophical tradition I could recognize, feel at home with, understand. Here was a tradition which virtually all of the philosophical questions which had troubled me and my tradition questions about knowledge, truth, personal identity, language, and reference were burning issues. Here I felt was a tradition which also placed great stress upon the probative significance of valid arguments with true premises. These observations fit the biblical claim that all humans are made in the divine image, and so think in essentially the same ways despite significant cultural differences. Okay, so no matter if you're in Africa, no matter if you're in Antarctica, Australia, doggone South America, this is one of the things that that God implanted on us when he created human beings and made them in his image to be rational creatures. And this is one of them, that we operate according to these fundamental laws of thought. So, when people try to do that and get the drop and basically try to colonialize or imperialize these things as Western concepts, that's just a failure to have a little bit of self-reflection, because everybody uses them. Okay, so logic is important. So I just want to give a refresher on the way that I engage in apologetics and do worldview analysis, and I'm getting ready to expose the faulty worldview that Anthony Browder puts forth in the next episode. And we're going to be using some of those laws of logic that I also talked about, but we're also going to be putting the worldview to at least 3 tests. I cannot tell you which 3 as of yet, but I said in a while back that the test that any worldviews must pass are the test of reason, the test of experience, and the test of practice. Now, just to briefly hit on each one, the test of reason here is going to involve those laws of logic, but it's also going to involve the critical thinking aspect of of any worldview that we as choosing individuals must do. Okay, the test of reason points out that a worldview must first make sense of itself. Okay, it must be coherent. It must be consistent. Okay, it must be logically consistent. And if the tenets of this worldview fit together, okay, this worldview is more likely to be true. On the flip side, if the core tenets of the worldview are logically incoherent, the worldview is inconsistent in some of its, in some of those tenets, then a red flag must be raised regarding the truth of it. Okay, so check this out. And I'm going to be picking on Browder again. Okay. And let me see if I can find his quote real quick. Give me just 1 second. Just 1 sec. Here it comes. All right. For example, Browder is a cultural relativist, and he's a lot more than that, and we'll get into that later. That is, for him, it is culture that is ultimately the arbiter of truth and values. But check this out. Let's look at what he says in his book from the Browder File, Volume 2. The Earth is inhabited by billions of humans who are subject to the same forces of gravity, time, and space, whose lives are affected by the elements of earth, wind, air, and fire. Sound like a group. How they perceive these elements and forces often determined by their geographic location and their cultural orientation. A person living in the desert will relate to the sun and water much differently from someone living on the tropical side. To this end, the forces and elements of nature, even the plants and animals in the environment, have a profound effect on people's lives and help shape their perceptions of reality. Okay? Let's finish up with another quote. While religion and spirituality are important issues in the life of all of all people, African Americans must become equally impassioned when it comes to rediscovering and retaining their own cultural worldview. Such a perspective would allow them to see the world through African eyes and enable them to appreciate that viewpoint. Such a perspective is necessary if Africans are to ever free themselves from psychological bondage imposed on them by the enslavers generations ago. Now, none of that addresses the truth of the matter, but only how different people from different regions of the world perceive things differently. Never ask the question, what is true or false? Okay, but check this out. What does a cultural relativist do when one culture encroaches on another culture? Let's look at slavery. Okay, premise 1. Owning another human being as a piece of personal property is objectively and absolutely wrong and should not be permitted. Premise 2. There is at least one moral fact that applies to all people transtemporally and transculturally. Okay. Premise 3. There are, according to moral relativism and cultural relativism, there are absolutely no absolutes or objective moral standards that apply to people transculturally entrenched poorly. Okay, so here's the conclusion: there are no absolute moral standards, and this is where you see they want to have their cake and eat it too. There is at least one absolute moral standard. Okay, so by the laws of logic, if your original proposition, in this case, the combination of the two original worldview beliefs, generates an explicit contradiction, it necessarily entails the falsity of the original position. In this case, the falsity of at least one of the original worldview beliefs. Thus, moral relativists are left with a dilemma. Okay, somebody like Browder, either their worldview belief in moral relativism, cultural relativism, is false, or their worldview belief that certain actions are objectively and absolutely wrong is false. Either way, we have found a contradiction within the worldview. Okay, worldview examination can bring such internal contradictions to light and enable the individual to discern which worldview belief is closer to the core of the worldview, or which belief is more soundly grounded rationally, evidentially, and existentially. Okay, now in addition to the test of reason, we have the test of experience. The test of experience looks at how well the worldview makes sense of reality. Okay, worldview, John Sire notes that worldviews as narratives or conceptual constructs must account for what we know about the world. Okay, and he goes on to say that an adequate worldview must be able to comprehend the data of reality, data of all types, that which each of us gleans through our conscious experience of daily life, that which is supplied by critical analysis and scientific investigation, that which is reported to us from the experience of others as well. So that's testimony. In other words, our worldview should be able to establish a correspondence to the evidence around us. A good worldview should be able to be placed alongside of reality and see how well it explains the data. Some call this evidential or factual adequacy or explanatory scope and power. So, because we hold to a biblical worldview, which is a supernatural worldview, we can look at the events surrounding the life of Jesus, the empty tomb, the appearances to the apostles, Paul's conversion, the burial accounts, and once again, the empty tomb, and we can, based on the worldview that we have, explain that data in terms of God raising Jesus from the dead. So we can, look at the beginning of the cosmos, the universe. We can look at the test of experience regarding the resurrection, and our worldview supplies the explanatory power to deal with all of this data without engaging in ad hoc special pleading and things like that. So that's where the test of reason, not the test of reason, but the test of experience. Okay, so two examples of failures in this area are let me give you two. The two examples of failures in this area is the assertion that the universe is eternal and that all reality is one. Okay, I'll give an argument later that will serve a dual function to disprove this assertion that the universe is eternal. And I will briefly mention that any worldview that asserts that all reality is one is thus an illusion. That worldview cannot account for the fact that we experience diversity in reality that we find ourselves in. Okay, we also have certain psychological experiences such as hunger, joy, sadness, and desires. We are also warranted in the belief in other minds who we interact with on a daily basis. These undeniable experiences serve to falsify portions of any worldview that asserts the opposite. Well, what about the test of practice? Okay, so we got the test of reason, we got the test of experience, and we have the test of practice. What we have examined using our test so far is that a worldview must first make sense of itself. It must make sense of reality. And if it's worth its weight, okay, it would make sense of life. Said another way, can this worldview be lived out in a consistent manner? Okay, let's look at Browder's relativity again, or the fact that we cannot consistently live if God is everything, or that life is really an illusion. Okay, this is what we call existential dissonance. Okay, so if God is everything, or God is all things, and reality is ultimately one, why do we get mad at other people for the wrongs that they do? Of course, or shootings, robberies, things like that. Why do we break out of that illusion, which is if God is everything, all reality is one? Why do we decry such an illusion like that? And I told you I'm gonna be supplying receipts with Browder on another episode, because it's really interesting. But the simple fact of the matter is, you don't live that way. Nobody lives that way. You don't live that that we are. You don't live in such a way that we are one with reality. Because the white man would be just as much one with the reality as you are. And who are you getting mad at if there are no distinctions and things like that? And how can there be distinctions if reality is one? But my point is, in the test of practice, these people live as Christians, so to speak. But you got the test of reason, you got the test of experience, and you have the test of practice. So I think that we are well equipped for the next episode that we are going to dive into. And I hope that you guys will be joining me. I know that this was a lot of brain work, a little bit, but these are tools in the toolbox that we have to know how to use. And I look forward to putting these bad boys to use with you, and allowing God to use me to help others on their journey as Christians who are ready to stand and give an answer for the hope that they have within them. God bless you guys. Get out, go walking, and don't go crazy while we're all trying to fight this COVID-19. God bless you, and may the Lord protect you.